our live stream. I'm so thrilled that you're with us here again today. Live stream, if you have friends, family across the country, anyone, it really doesn't matter where they are. They could be overseas. They can tune in. Just make sure they go to the website and do exactly what you're doing here. Remember, we're doing this to educate you. We spend our time for no remuneration, our efforts to bring more knowledge, more information to help and to bless you. Last week we talked about guarding your heart. I wanted to kind of build on that because I believe this goes beyond just guarding your heart. Now, when I think of the heart, the physical heart, my discussions were, as I thought about this more and more this week, that you would always perceive, well, this is just for the heart muscle itself. What this is really about is the whole circulatory system. Because an article I discussed on the program this week talked about that arterial stiffness, your circulatory system, as the stiffness increases as we age and as there's diminished blood flow, it's actually a predictor of mental or cognitive decline. So what's actually happening to your circulatory system that affects this, the physical heart, is documented now to affect the brain as well. Simply put, the greater your risk factors for heart disease, atherosclerosis, the greater your risk factors for dementia, cognitive decline as we age, and certainly then the big A, Alzheimer's. All right, so where do we want to go? So I kind of want to encourage you today to maybe not get hung up on the details. You know, triglycerides, C-reactive protein, that should be HS, C-reactive protein, highly specific. Fibrinogen, homocysteine, lipoprotein A, stress. Joe, I don't know what those are. All my doctor does is check cholesterol. So how in the world would I do? Don't get hung up on any of that. Remember, this is to teach you, to educate you, propel you forward, to create a greater knowledge base. And what this should be today is, how do I change my diet? What do I do from a nutrient standpoint to protect and enhance my protection of my cardiovascular system, my circulatory system, which then will enhance and help my heart and certainly help my brain as well. Let me read to you today, Vindicate me, O Lord. No, I don't want to read that one. Excuse me. Psalm, let's go over here to Psalm 100, verse 1. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is good. I always want to encourage you from a scriptural standpoint. Last week we talked about guarding your heart and protecting your heart, the seat of our being, not the physical aspect of this. Today I just want to encourage you about just maintaining joy. And this whole past week we've kind of done a little study on joy and what it really means, and I certainly don't want to go through all that again right now. But John 15:11, the Gospel of John, says, "These things I have spoken unto you, that my joy may remain in you, that your joy may be full." Things I've spoken unto you, that my joy. Whose joy is it? And I try to define that our happiness is not joy. Joy is something that comes from within. Happiness many times is what we receive externally. I would want to encourage you to realize that the Bible is very explicit about the joy of the Lord, about how Jesus here said that our joy is in him, that your joy might be full, because literally it is the joy that we're taking on from him. The other thought that I just wanted to leave you with today is, the loneliness thing. How many folks suffer and battle from loneliness? And I think that a lot of that's one of the most basic human needs, lonely. I'm lonely. I don't have connection. And ultimately, if we don't have connection this way with other individuals in our lives, whether it's friends or our family members, and we lack those connections, we many times feel empty, we're lonely. Now, the most basic human need is to never be alone. And the Bible promises you that you are not alone, that we have we have a relationship with him. So I don't know where you are, I don't care where you are in this or what place you are in your life, but I want to read to you out of Utmost for His Highest, Oswald Chambers. It says, have the right relationship with God, finding your joy there. See, it's not external. A right relationship with him is where our true joy comes from. And out of you will flow rivers of living water. That's depicted in John 7:38. Be a fountain through which Jesus can pour his living water. Stop being hypocritical, proud, aware of only yourself, and live your life hidden with Christ in God, as Colossians 3 says. A person who has the right relationship with God lives a life that is as natural as breathing wherever he goes. The lives that have been the greatest blessing to you, I want you to think about this, are the lives of those people who themselves are literally unaware having been a blessing. Why? Because their lives are so hidden in him. They're so vertically connected. They're not as encompassed about by their circumstances. They're so tuned into God that literally they become a blessing to you because they're living out their lives in him. Be encouraged today. Loneliness, you're away from friends, you're away from connection. Your connection ultimately has to be with him. Your joy ultimately does come from him. Guarding your heart. Let's talk about it. Let's go right back to it. I think what I'm going to do today is I'm probably going to, I don't want to say summarize, because I'm not summarizing. I'm going to go back and tell you why it's important to manage a couple of these areas. And as we do this, I'm then going to go into kind of the supplement regime and why I believe that they're critical. So an individual has high cholesterol. They've had maybe heart attacks, they've had bypasses and stents. So their cardiologist tells them, so now what you've got to do, lower your cholesterol, and if you do this and take your statins, then that's the answer. And my argument has been that I'm not so sure that I buy that completely. Is there an element of truth? Absolutely. But what we do see, that cardiovascular health is also a function of your circulation, how the blood flows, inflammation, metals, chemicals, all these different components. If I can improve the circulatory capacities, what I then do is actually lower your cardiac risk. But the key part of this is not just through cholesterol, which I believe is what we're doing today with what? Statins and the medications. And I'm not to say that statins can't lower cholesterol, and they do, and not that they can't lower inflammation. It's documented that they do. So I'm not here to be an antagonist today, certainly. What I want to do is expand your knowledge and expand your thinking, that your thoughts about protecting and guarding your heart have to go beyond total cholesterol and just using statins to do that. So, okay, I'm going to go back. Let's work backwards. Triglycerides. We always talk about cholesterol, but we never really want to talk about triglycerides. If your triglycerides are elevated and you have a very disproportionate HDL to triglyceride ratio, you have a significant risk factor. And what I mean by that, if you go much beyond a 3-to-1 ratio, that's a significant risk factor. Your HDLs in relationship to your triglycerides. So it goes beyond just your total cholesterol. You know that we have already taught you in Guarding Your Heart 1, if you have high levels of inflammation, C-reactive protein, you have the beginnings of atherosclerosis because of trauma that is inflicted on the vessel wall. Next, fibrinogen. Did you know that fibrinogen that is elevated increases a stroke risk by up to 30, and in some literature pieces, 40% with elevated fibrinogen? If you have if you've never had one, we need to get one. Do you check it every 6 months? No, but we need to get one. Also an indirect marker of inflammation. How would I lower that? Well, we'll come to the nutrient side of this in a moment, because I don't want to confuse you. Say, well, I don't know how to manage that. I don't know how to manage that, so I'm just going to turn this off. No, we'll come to that after we take a little break, and we'll get back to that. Next, I already covered homocysteine. Homocysteine is a byproduct of cysteine or cystine metabolism, methionine metabolism. If it is elevated, you are at a higher risk for what? It creates damage to the vessel wall. Then once the damage is created, now I form those atheromas we've covered. White blood cells, macrophages, cholesterol comes in, attempts to patch up the damage to that vessel wall. Well, I just knocked those over. Then once I create the damage to that vessel wall, now I form these atheromas because the foam cells come in and protect. So what do we have to do? We have to manage elevated homocysteine. That's a simple blood work as well. But in the end, I'm going to give you some basic nutrients that covers a lot of this area. Lp(a). Do you know that this is an independent risk factor? Elevated Lp(a) can increase your cardiovascular risk incidence by 40% just by having lipoprotein A elevated. Never done typically on blood work. Your stroke risk goes up as well. There's actually was an article in the medical journals just this past couple of months that's saying, lipoprotein(a). In essence, they were saying it kind of just never goes away. We've known about it for years. The medical community doesn't pay much attention to it, never test for it, but it kind of seems like it always resurrects itself as being a cardiac risk factor. Guarding your heart, we must manage these areas. Stress. Boy, this is big. Why? When I'm under stress, what I will do is, let me just do this. When I'm under a lot of stress, I release a ton, high stress, I release a ton of stress hormones. We call them catecholamines, cortisol. And what the end result of that is a tightening of the vessel wall, damage to the vessel wall, inflammation, and then now comes the process of foam cells, macrophages, cholesterol coming to attempt to protect that area. Stress is a huge risk factor for cardiovascular disease. How do you manage it? That's a difficult thing. I think that we've got to have plenty of nutrients on board that do what? That raise up a standard. So we can't always, I've had a stressful couple weeks, employee issues, business issues, decisions that we make. I've got to do a radio broadcast 6 days a week. I do consults with many of you. Makes us crazy sometimes, literally. On the phone till even 7 o'clock at night, even after I leave here, 7:30 at home, 8:30 one night. All right, stress. We can't stop it. It's part of our lives. I believe your principal coping mechanism is right here. That's how I believe that we manage some of the stress in our lives. Secondarily, we've got to have adequate nutrients that counterbalance. So what could be anti-stress nutrients? Well, if you have adequate levels of the buffered ascorbates, it reduces the trauma. This is documented to keep your vessel walls open. See, because remember, when there's inflammation, there's trauma to the lining, there's constriction coming from these stress hormones that we're producing and inflammation. Buffered C can help to attenuate or guard against that. The omegas, the right forms of omegas, what do? They also help to stabilize the plaques that maybe you've already formed. They reduce the inflammation, and they also help to raise up. I'm just going to do like a little wall here. They help when you've got these stress and all these factors coming against you. If you have a breach in the wall, they will obviously get through and they will damage. When I say the wall, I'm talking about the protective mechanisms, and they will create damage to now your vessel wall. What we're attempting to do here is to say what we need to do is to raise up the protective mechanisms with some nutrients that attenuates, that doesn't let these factors that we're talking about, elevated fibrinogen, high stress hormone output, etc., damage. So the omegas can help to do that. The next area that I would look at when you think about this area is understanding the key role not only of the omegas and the buffered C ascorbates, but resveratrol. And we use, and I just knocked that on the floor a minute ago, trans resveratrol. We call it resveratrol plus. It's got to be the right forms. Resveratrol can actually modify the damage and the implication of what's happening here as well. So we go back. All right, if I got elevated triglycerides, that's a problem. That's not your cholesterol, by the way. Number 2, C-reactive protein, elevated fibrinogen, homocysteine, lipoprotein A. These are all labs that you can have done. If you live other parts of the country, we can have you go to walk-in labs. You can have these. You don't have to have these done all the time, but we should eventually get these if you have a family history of cardiovascular issues. If you have a family history of dementia, cognitive, mental decline. That's a huge problem as well. The next two areas, anger and stress, are the areas that there's not a lab for that, right? These are areas that we can attempt to modify through supplementation, dietary changes, nutrients. But stress and anger, we know that anger, there's literature that shows that folks that have had major anger outbursts, major fights, arguments, that there's a significant, I've actually read, I think there's a 4-fold increase incidence of a heart attack and MI within 2 hours of a stressful, angerous, if that's a word. Is that a word? Angerous. An angry outbreak. An angry outbreak, your heart attack risk goes up. Why? You release all those, I'll get fancy here, all those chemokines, all those catecholamines, high cortisol begins to damage the vessel wall. Remember, we've got to raise up a standard with nutrients that help protect and reduce that. Very difficult to do once the damage has already been inflicted and been done. All right, so we get that. We'll cover the nutrient side a little bit in the second part of this. I want to go over real quick as we kind of close on guarding your heart part 2. Saturated fats, the sugars, chemicals, metals that we're exposed to, alcohol, just generic lifestyle risk factors, exercise, etc. So what I'm just going to show you quickly is, if you look at, just some of the folders that I have. I have a folder, this is just one of them, just on omegas and the benefits, should I be over here? Okay, of omegas in protecting the cardiovascular system. The other area that I have, if you look, let's knock that off. Let's knock a little bit of coffee off. Cholesterol, some of the truths and myths about oxidized cholesterol. And then these 3, just on cardiovascular risk issues. Say, oh, well, that's all like medical stuff. No, it's all about natural interventions, how to reduce platelet activity, how to reduce inflammation. These all are trying to depict for you how we do reduce the cardiovascular risk factors. So we've got a ton of information that documents, that supports, that obviously I would be doing this for days if I attempted to completely go over this. But for right now, know that we went back, we talked about the triggers, the issues, how do you deal with it. Now I want to get into some of the basics. If you consume a lot of sugar, that's just a huge problem. Sugar is going to encourage what we call insulin resistance. Insulin resistance and elevated insulin is another risk factor. We did cover this before. If you eat a ton of sugar, it will damage your brain, number one. It will damage your cardiovascular issues because it causes what we call glycation. It causes like a cellular cement to form. All right. So high sugar diets. Oh, it increases your risk for type 2 diabetes, no doubt. But principally and simply, you've got to understand that when I spike my insulin levels, this helps to harden the arteries, damage to the vessel walls once again. So don't just see a lot of sugar as gaining weight in type 2 diabetes, seeing it as a damaging agent to your cardiovascular system. Saturated fats. We eat way too many saturated fats. As Americans, we eat way too many deep fried foods. We eat too many processed types of animal fats, rancid animal fats. Huge issue. And we don't consume enough of the right types of fats. So I do not believe that a lot of the literature is correct in saying, and I don't want to say just not just a belief, I can back that up, that we need to reduce all kinds of fats to reduce our cardiovascular risk. No, actually a Mediterranean-style diet that has plenty of good fats, nuts, seeds, olive oil, reduces your risk. So it's really about the types, or I'm just going to put that, the types of fats that you consume. Saturated fats, deep fried foods, rancid fats, those are problematic. Hydrogenated fats that were used, it was ubiquitous in the food industry for years. We used tons of hydrogenated fats. That was a risk factor for heart disease and for cancer as well. I've just got to get folks changing, understanding that fats are not evil. It's really about the type. Olive oils, nuts, seeds, good sources of fats. They're protective. They protect the vascular wall. Sugar, we've talked about. Saturated fats, heavy metals. You actually can't control that. They're metals, but many of you have mercury amalgams. When you off-gas that mercury, ethyl mercury, vapors from chewing, you're a dentist, you're going to disagree. You can disagree, whatever. The bottom line is the metals are affecting our vascular walls. They affect lots of things, but today we're talking about, right, the circulatory system, our cardiovascular system. They create trauma. We call it oxidative stress. Remember, we've got to use nutrients and a diet that builds a wall that as these insults like heavy metals are coming, saturated fats are coming, stress hormones, we'll just use a generic component, and there are more, right? Lipoprotein A if it's elevated, and homocysteine, and all these things are trying to come along, and the whole process is, whether it's anger outbursts, whether it's high stress output, whether it's elevated triglycerides, whether it's heavy metals, all of these components are literally attempting to attack and assault you in multiple areas. And I would say to you, what we've got to be able to do is use nutrients and lifestyle to attenuate. Now, can you do it 100%? Heck no. No, you can't do it 100%. But what you can do is significantly reduce by, remember, if you don't, you leave breaches, and these components will get through, okay? These components, these negative things are going to damage you. Alcohol, it's a risk factor. Any way you cut it, it turns to sugar, raises and spikes insulin, glycation, hardens and firms up the vascular wall. It's a trigger. So alcohol is a big issue. Insulin, I will tell you, and there's a lot of things I could go through here, but I don't want to, because I just feel like I could be taking this on for hours. So here's the bottom line before we go to a break. This little thing I wrote here, lifestyle. Okay, so I want to make this point, and then we're going to slip away to a break real quick, and then we're going to come back and close on what are the nutrients that I'm talking about. Do you realize there's literature and studies that show that lifestyle changes, which will encompass things like your diet, smoking, alcohol, exercise? I didn't even talk about exercise. I mean, that's really a big issue here. Physical activity, working the cardiovascular system, changing your diet, stop smoking, reduce alcohol, get physically fit, move the body, improve your circulatory capacity, using key nutrients. Listen closely. It has a 4 times increase or impact in effectiveness in preventing secondary incidences of plaque formation, cardiovascular disease, circulatory problems, versus the typical world. If you're a cardiologist, not offending you, but when we just apply pharmaceuticals, meds, etc., as the mechanism to protect you against secondary components, the literature shows that if you make lifestyle interventions and changes, it is 4 times as effective as just traditional pharmacology in the world of cardiology. Does that make sense? So that's what this is all about. Guarding your heart too. We're going to slip away to a break. We'll do a little quick worship video for you again. We come back, I'm going to clean the board up, and we're going to move into a couple of key nutrients and how. Now, is it going to be all-encompassing? No, because I can talk about pomegranate, I can talk about quercetin, I could talk about curcumin and turmeric, I can talk about a lot of things. But I want to give you like the basic tight version of this as to how you can guard your heart, your circulatory system, your blood flow. And it's not just about this, it's about how blood flows throughout our entire body. We maintain better health, and you know what? It protects and saves and preserves your brain as well. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with you. Just blessings to you, wherever you're listening from or viewing from today. I just pray that His presence certainly is with you. And how many of you know that the Bible teaches us that there's no distance in the Spirit? And when we speak words of life, these are not words of just man or just empty words, that the Word of God is, the Bible says, alive, that it's sharper than any two-edged sword, that it changes us, it changes lives. And I just want to encourage you and just speak life and favor to you today, and not in some, name it, claim it, not in some metaphysical sense. It's the Word of God. So be encouraged. And even as He told Joshua that we were to be strong, and Joshua was to be strong and to be of good courage as he trusted in his God. Thanks for being with us. Now, the protection, the standard. You like my artwork here? No. Just a little... what am I going to say to you? We've got to raise up a standard. We've got to have some protection. We've got to have some built-in mechanisms. Gosh, I could put a lot of other things in here, curcumin, and I could do some things on quercetin and pomegranate. But for the sake of ease today, I just want to do the basics. So how do we raise up a standard? We know you've got to change your lifestyle. We know you've got to eat foods that are live and that are real. I've got to get you eating more vegetables. So let me just do this as well. I'm going to put here nutrient-dense foods. What is your protection? What's your standard? If you have a family history of heart disease, or you personally do, if you're not eating more fiber, and I'm not just talking about taking Metamucil. We've got some great fiber sources, Clear Fiber, Regularity Fiber Guard. I've got to get you eating fiber sources that are a part of your food supply. Broccoli, cauliflower, fibers that are in food that you consume. Why? It lowers inflammation, number one. It improves the circulatory capacity. It reduces insulin spikes. Remember, I taught you that elevated insulin, not just your blood sugar, damages your vessel walls. You eat nutrient-dense foods. What am I after? Things like vitamin K, K1, K2, documented to be protective to the cardiovascular system. Folate, the good forms of folic acid. The B family that helps to lower homocysteine. I mean, you see foods as building up that standard. Antioxidants, the carotenoid family, vitamin A derivatives, the mixed carotenoids that are in things like sweet potatoes and in yams and in yellow and in green and orange types of vegetables and leafy greens and so on. Vitamin K, folic acid, minerals, magnesium and potassium. Do you know that even a simple mag-potassium prep could, an absorbable one, like the one we use that's fully ionized, can relax the vasculature. See, when it alkalinizes you. So gosh, when I tell you that I could go on and do this for hours, I'm telling you, just through lifestyle, you say, well, I don't know. My doctor told me that it's just in my genes. There could be some things. We didn't talk, I didn't put up on the screen before the MTHFR issue. Yeah, that's a... Writing and talking at the same time is a little tough. MTHFR, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. If I have an inborn error of metabolism, that could be a genetic thing, but we can document that. But I am telling you, you raise the fiber, you raise nutrient-dense foods, you get rid of the saturated fats, you get in good fats, olive oils, nuts, seeds. It reduces inflammation. It's protective to the cardiovascular system. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. You get quercetin in things like grapes. You get resveratrol in things like grapes. The nutrients that are in pomegranate, hugely protective. Curcumin, turmeric. I mean, if you've got a high cardiovascular history, I pulled out two things, like a polyresveratrol, which we'll talk about in a minute, or just the straight resveratrol. But start with your diet, nutrient-dense foods, higher fiber, good fats. We've got to reduce the bad fats, cut back the sugar. Sugar in and of itself just doesn't give you heart disease. It's what it does to our bodies. It spikes the insulin. It creates inflammation. Insulin elevated, starts to harden our artery walls. The sugar links up with certain protein parameters in our body and causes what we call glycation. There's cross-linking. It forms a cellular cement. It makes your artery walls stiff as boards. That's a huge problem. That means I don't get blood flow. If I don't get blood flow, I'm telling you, it damages your brain, right? It damages your brain. It damages your heart indirectly, and I don't get circulation. I read an article this past week that showed that a 30-year-old versus an 80-year-old has about, the 80-year-old has about 4 times less oxygen exchange that's taking place in their body. And a lot of it is to do with poor circulation. We don't breathe, exhale and inhale. As we age, we become more and more sedentary. Praise God. I don't care if you're 70, 85, I don't care what age. If you can move and do anything, that is critical. God built you to move. When you move your blood. You oxygenate. You carry nutrients. You carry replenishment. You carry restoration to your cells. Okay, so I don't want to get into, because I don't know if we got questions, but I don't know what type of diet. I'm going to do something on diets and how we should eat, at a later point in time. I just know that the lifestyle interventions, don't go through the drive-thrus. You say, well, I'm at work and I don't have to. Bring food. Bring some organic chicken breast with a big mixed green salads. I'll tell you, sometimes I know you're going to go crazy, I open a jar of Italian tuna with chickpeas. I have olive oil, vinegar here, pepper, salt. I bring hard-boiled eggs. I bring apples. I got bags of nuts here. You just think in terms of live and real foods. I've got my smoothie this morning with our Essential Meal Plus, which is all plant-based, pumpkin, pea, rice protein. There's mango in here. There's blueberries, and I believe I threw some blackberries in here, or raspberries. I have almond milk, a little bit of water, and a small banana. This is a nutrient-dense, I need to start throwing some greens in here and so on, but this is a nutrient-dense I didn't eat this morning. I had 2 of these. I'm drinking my breakfast, and it's a quality, nutrient-dense, protective mechanism to my body. Listen to me. Just hear me out on this, because I know there's folks that mock this. And there's folks that make fun. And there's folks that in the traditional medical community just say, well, you've got to do the world of pharmacology. Look, my background is in pharmacology. I'm a naturopath. I'm a board-certified clinical nutritionist, but I'm also a pharmacist. And I'm telling you that thank God for meds in areas that we need them. But that can't be your answer when it comes to things like this. Cardiovascular disease continues to rise. Do you know how many people walk around with peripheral artery disease? Raynaud's, that can have an autoimmune component, maybe not a great example. But even just we're inflamed. We're losing our brains prematurely because of lack of blood flow and protective nutrients. It's affecting our heart. It's got to start with your diet. It absolutely has to start with. Okay, I'm already running out of time, so here we go. Okay, guarding your heart. Are you laughing at me? I think Josiah's. He's laughing at me. All right, he knows I talk too much, but he's nice and he never tells me that. I talk too much, don't I? Yeah, I do. Okay, omegas. What's it do? It has anti-platelet activity. It makes your platelets move quicker and smoother. It reduces inflammation in the vessel wall. It stabilizes plaque formation. When you reduce inflammation, you actually can reduce your triglycerides. Any old omegas? We have the triglyceride form, triple molecular distillation. It gets no better. It gets no better than this. And I mean that. I have a little trouble with this headset here today. All right, antiplatelet, makes your blood less sticky, reduces inflammation, lowers triglycerides. What's this mean? You say, wait a minute, so what if I have, it stabilizes the plaque that's already there. It has antiarrhythmic properties. I don't care what you read, you take this to the bank. I do scads of this every day. I take my omega 2800s, teaspoon or 2 in the morning. I take about 4 of these a day. Whoops. You think I'm kidding you? You say, well, you just, maybe you're kidding yourself. I don't believe so. You know why? Because I got tons of literature. I'm not saying I just know what I'm talking about, or God forbid I'm some smart guy. I've got data to back up what I'm talking to you about. I believe in this. This is me. I do them. Reduce the triggers. Let's jump over to buffered C. Buffered C is critical. Now, I have so many things on buffered C. I pulled out literature. I don't even know where to start. Here's what happens. We know that it increases nitric oxide production. So it dilates the vessel walls. It reduces the damage that comes from metals and other chemicals. It's protective. It's a key antioxidant. It improves the structural membrane of the vessel wall. It helps you, it's a precursor to collagen. Remember I talked to you about how you had the intima in the lining of the vessel wall, the inner part, then you had the media, then you had the adventitia, you have 3 different layers. This intima wall is critical, but we need collagen matrix in the middle. Guess who does that for you? C. Buffered C ascorbates. I have data that says that even in a diabetic that has lost the elasticity, you give him a bolus of quality forms of C, boom, it literally opens up his artery walls. Why? It raises nitric oxide. It reduces oxidative stress. It raises up that wall, that standard. If you've got a history or you want to be protective, if you're not doing a ton of buffered C, huge mistake. Huge mistake. Buffered C ascorbates. Let's jump over to resveratrol. I just printed a couple things on resveratrol. Anti-inflammatory responses of resveratrol. Purpose of this review was to provide evidence that resveratrol exhibits potent anti-inflammatory mechanisms, to explain the underlying mechanism to both resveratrol induce cardioprotective and anti-inflammatory properties. It is responsible. Its anti-inflammatory mechanism is responsible for its cardioprotective mechanism. This was from, believe it or not, the Journal of Inflammation, Allergy, and Drug Targeting in 2007. Journal of Food Medicine, Beneficial Effects of Resveratrol and Atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is a progressive disease characterized by the accumulation of lipids, more than that, fibrous elements in the arteries, as a most important contributor to cardiovascular disease. But resveratrol, a naturally occurring phytopolyphenol compound, is able to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. The beneficial effects, resveratrol can inhibit the initiation and the progression of atherosclerosis. It has specific gene interaction, anti-inflammatory activities, modifies LDL cholesterol, antiplatelet aggregation. Do I need to go on? I don't want to bore you, for goodness sake. Polyphenolic compounds, which is what we find here in resveratrol and some of the other things, as a mimic for what they call a neurotensin receptor functioning, improving blood flow characteristics and properties through the vessel walls. Let me get to this real quick. Transresveratrol, is it a magical elixir for youth? You know, I don't like those types of thoughts, but Current Medicinal Chemistry 2008 actually goes through and says, you know, if you look at the breakdown of what's in the skin of grapes, okay, the epidermis and so on, this transresveratrol, it has, again, biological activities, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, platelet anti-aggregation, and anti-carcinogenic properties, anti-cancer, and modulates lipoprotein metabolism. I could go on. I mean, this is all in scientific journals and literature on resveratrol. So a winning combination to protect and guard your physical heart by protecting the circulatory system, buffered C ascorbates, quality omega, triglyceride forms, triple molecular distillation, transresveratrol. It's got to be the right form of resveratrol. Let's jump over to Perfect E. Now, contrary to all of the nonsense that's out there about how bad E is for you, that's a subject. Let's do that one after this one. What do you think on E? just easy. Perfect E. Why? 4 tocotrienols in here, 4 tocopherols. You know all those studies that say E is bad? You know what they used? DL tocopheryl acetate. a synthetic form. None of the studies ever have shown that when you use the good forms, the right forms, tocopherols, tocotrienols, these are the ones that are protective. And do you know that the right forms of E synergize and recycle? C and E literally shuttle electrons back to one another. They keep one another alive. Perfect E. If you're not using Perfect E and you've got a cardiac history or you're preventative, you need to be doing it. Next, the role of vitamin D. I don't want to get into a ton of this, but vitamin D is absolutely linked to cardiovascular issues. The lower your D, the higher the rate of cardiovascular. So you know what my feelings on this. On your labs, you've got to be 50 to 70. I believe it's nanograms per deciliter, but 50 to 70 on your labs, on your 25OH vitamin D. So what have we covered here so far? Buffered C, huge protect. That's only a smidgen of what it does, by the way. The omegas, this is only a portion of what it does. It has antiarrhythmic properties, reduces plaque formation, stabilizes plaque formation, antiplatelet, anti-inflammatory, lowers your triglycerides. Transresveratrol, I just read to you. E has tremendous protective mechanisms to the circulatory and the cardiovascular system. We have one gal that is a nurse herself, and I have others, by the way. Matter of fact, I'm meeting with the one this coming week. Just as an example, I can't make medical claims on here with nutrients, but this is a statement of just fact. These are just two, if you will, case studies. We had a woman a few years back, 70% occlusion of her carotids. We got her on kind of this basic regime. Tons of this, obviously the omegas, the buffered C ascorbates, and so on. She had her Dopplers done about a year later. It went down to about 50% in the 70s. She had it done subsequently another year, went down into the 40s. She had literally almost reduced in half. And you say, well, it still had 30% or 40% blockage. Really, that's nothing in comparison to most Americans. Just recently, a woman, nurse herself, cardiac nurse, started with 70 plus. I believe on her one Doppler, it had reduced down into the 50s to 60s. I believe her most recent one it's down between the 40s and 50 percentile from 70 by just doing the basic regime. Obviously, for both of these people, I will tell you that lifestyle and diet was a huge commitment as well. All right, MTHFR, what is that? I didn't bring the container back. The specific form of methyl tetrahydrofolate. What is that? It's folic acid. So why don't you just say that? Well, it's a different form of folic acid. It is a form that is more cellular ready, body ready. What it does, it raises the supportive mechanism. It does lots of things, but we're just talking about the circulatory system here. It actually enhances blood flow. Literally, enhances blood flow. You can have an MTHFR level done. But the right forms of folic acid, we have that. Actually, there was a lot of trouble actually getting the right forms. In our new version of the Daily Essentials, we will have this new form in here. So if you look at this on balance, say, Joe, what about, I heard that, CoQ is a great antioxidant and it's protective to the cardiovascular system. It most certainly is. But for sake of time, I did not want to cover 20 different supplements. I really tried to zero in on some key players. But if you say, but is it okay? I take 200 to 400 milligrams of CoQ a day. Huge antioxidant, protective, raises cardiac function, raises energy status in the myocardium, raises mitochondrial production. It encourages electron transfer. I am telling you that if you look at the literature, this is not just about your cholesterol. This is about all those other cofactors that we've discussed. Now, when I start talking about lipoprotein A, are there nutrients that can lower? Yes, omegas can lower lipoprotein A. Buffered C can lower lipoprotein A. What about C-reactive protein? You talked about that. Change your diet. Get more plants in. More good fats and oils. But you know what else can lower? What did I just say? Lipoprotein A? LP little a? LP little a. C-reactive protein. Do you know that the omegas and buffered C can lower both of these. All right? If you have an elevated homocysteine level on your blood work, well, we're going to get you on the right forms of folic acid that we just discussed, B6 and B12. This will lower homocysteine. You don't have to take them individually. We have them in combinations. So many of the parameters, Joe, you put fibrinogen. Did you know that I would probably use some time-release niacin, but if you have elevated fibrinogen, did you know that C can lower fibrinogen as well? If you're really high, we would use a time-release niacin. That's why I said I want to talk about all the different preps. But all those risk factors, elevated Lp(a), elevated homocysteine, fibrinogen, elevated triglycerides, C-reactive protein, some of the nutrients that we've talked about here today, along with diet, begin to modify these guys. Lower them. Reduces your cardiovascular. Well, what about my cholesterol? Your cholesterol should change unless you have kind of an inborn liver metabolic issue, type 4 hypercholesterolemia, where you just keep making you don't get the signal, you keep making LDLs. Then we have get you on some steel-cut oats, get you on some plant sterolins, get you on an organic whole food source of red yeast rice to help modify your cholesterol levels. I mean, there are things certainly supplementally that you can do here, and the omegas. Did you know actually high doses of C, believe it or not, are actually shown to lower your lipids? So when I tell you I love the buffered C ascorbates, there's a reason for that, because it does so many things. Is cholesterol a risk factor? Ask me that question directly. I say yes. Is it the only risk factor, as we're kind of told from the science community? No, absolutely not. Lp(a), fibrinogen, can you modify them? Yes. Can you guard and protect your heart? Yes. Should you guard and protect your heart? Yes. A friend of ours is losing weight, tired all the time. Medical doctor gave her several tests, can't find anything. Losing weight, tired all the time. She started doing research, and her symptoms were the same as someone that had to get the filling removed from their teeth. She's going to a dentist to get this procedure done. Could this actually be the cause? Wow, I'm not real sure. Tired all the time, losing weight. Certainly you have to think about heavy metals. I would just, I'd like to see a whole metabolic panel, chem panel, just to see what her other components are doing, her albumin levels. But certainly, can metals do some bad things to you? No question about it. Depends how many she has. You got any other questions there? My uncle just got diagnosed with leukemia. You make any comments or suggestions? Certainly. Leukemia, I would say there's some literature actually out of Johns Hopkins, quality green tea extracts in really, really high doses. Vitamin D in really, really high doses. Certainly you might have to be on some pharmaceuticals or some medication, but I do believe there's a couple nutrients. D, high doses. A, high doses, correctly done. Very high doses of green tea extracts. And that green tea information comes out of Hopkins Medical School a few years back. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this live stream. We went, again, over what we wanted to do. I hope you're blessed by it. Be encouraged today over some of the things that we covered, and hopefully you're blessed and you will be able to apply some of these things to your life. Psalm 99 says, "The Lord reigns. Let the nations tremble as he sits enthroned between the cherubim. Let the earth shake. Great is the Lord in Zion. He is exalted over nations, and let them praise your great and awesome name, for he is holy. The King is mighty. He loves justice. You have established equity. In Jacob you have done what is just and right. Exalt the Lord our God and worship him at his footstool. Moses and Aaron were among his priests, and Samuel was among those who called on his name. They called on the Lord, and he answered them." They called on the Lord, and he answered them. You call on him today, he will answer you. May your joy be made full, as Jesus said, not in and of yourself, but may our joy be made full, or may it be completed as he imparts. It is his joy. It is vertical. Remember, it is not horizontal. That's happiness. We're not talking about happiness. We're talking about joy that comes from inside, comes from your Heavenly Father. God bless you. Thanks for being with us. I don't know what we're going to do next. We'll do something good, I hope. Thanks for tuning in. Have a blessed day.